Imagine waking up from a night of, like, really terrible sleep. Consecutive nightmares tossing and turning.
Oh, the worst kind of night.
Right. But then you realize your brain just spent the last 2 hours secretly running this highly advanced, kind of utterly bizarre emotional defragmentation program.
Yeah, complete with like fake neuroscience and actual physical comedy.
Exactly. So, welcome to this deep dive. I'm thrilled you are joining us today. We're exploring the architecture of the subconscious, and we're using this one incredibly rich source document.
That's such a great source.
It really is. We have our hands on this highly detailed personal journal entry from an author who chronicled a vivid, multi-layered dream. But we aren't just, analyzing a dream diary to interpret random symbols.
Right, no, we're not doing dream dictionaries here.
No, definitely not. The mission of this deep dive is to actually decode the structural mechanics of this specific dream. We want to explore the author's incredibly compelling hypothesis, which is, can our brains perform critical emotional detox and psychological repair even when we're suffering from poor, interrupted sleep?
And, the context provided in the source makes that hypothesis particularly fascinating, I think, because the author had been enduring a remarkably rough night.
Yeah, really rough.
They were suffering through short sleep, experiencing repeated awakenings in the middle of the night. And on top of that physical sleep fragmentation, they had just endured 2 consecutive, highly unpleasant nightmares.
Back-to-back nightmares are brutal.
Oh, they are. Biologically speaking, waking up from back-to-back nightmares means your sympathetic nervous system is just highly aroused, your cortisol levels are elevated, your heart rate is likely up, and you're basically bathed in the neurochemistry of stress.
Yeah.
The author wakes up feeling that lingering dread, and then, remarkably, somehow manages to fall asleep for a 3rd time.
Which, honestly, falling back asleep in that state is such an uphill battle.
Oh, absolutely.
Because your conscious mind is usually fighting the transition, right? It assumes the next sleep cycle is just going to be a continuation of the horror movie.
Yeah, it's bracing for impact.
Exactly. But the text's central thesis emerges from what happens during this 3rd sleep cycle. The author realizes, upon waking from this final stretch of sleep, they had experienced this incredibly detailed, highly positive dream.
And their immediate takeaway wasn't merely dismissing it as a pleasant fantasy.
No, it was this profound realization that the 3rd dream felt like the brain successfully flushing out emotional waste, after the first 2 failed attempts.
Right, and to understand the mechanism the author is describing there, we really have to look at the brain not just as a passive receiver of images. It's an active problem-solving engine.
Yeah.
When we sleep, particularly during REM sleep, the brain is tasked with processing the emotional residue of our waking lives. It takes the raw, often overwhelming data of our daily anxieties, frustrations, and fears, and it attempts to integrate them into our long-term memory networks in a way that, well, strips them of their immediate emotional charge.
Reading this source, the overarching analogy that kept coming to my mind was a computer. Like a computer running a deeply necessary but incredibly clunky disk defragmentation program overnight.
Oh, that's a perfect way to look at it.
Right. You know the scenario. Your operating system is sluggish, the fans are screaming, everything is misfiring, and you finally forced the system to run a diagnostic and repair utility.
Yeah, you just hit the button and hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this scenario, the first 2 attempts at running the program, like the first 2 times the author falls asleep and has nightmares, the system essentially crashes.
Right.
It throws up these terrifying error codes because it's simply overwhelmed by the corrupted, messy data of the waking emotional state.
And the corrupted data in this case being the accumulated stress and the elevated cortisol we just mentioned. The nightmares are the system basically failing to sort that data cleanly.
Yeah. And then on that 3rd pass, the program finally catches. It writes a custom patch, it sorts the scattered files, it clears the cache of residual fear, and it leaves the system running smoothly. The author literally wakes up feeling refreshed, emotionally regulated, and fundamentally repaired.
That's amazing.
It is. But to understand how the brain achieved this successful defragmentation on the 3rd attempt, we first have to look at the environment it constructed for this detox to take place.
Yes, the setting.
Right. We need to examine the architecture of the subconscious because the setting of this dream is incredibly deliberate.
It's so deliberate. The environment your brain builds in a dream state really dictates the parameters of the psychological work that can be done there.
Yeah.
According to the journal, the dream takes place in a bookstore, but the author makes a very specific, deliberate distinction here. It is a massive, single-floor bookstore, and crucially, it is not a library.
I found that distinction to be like the masterstroke of the brain's architectural design here.
Oh, totally.
Because a library and a bookstore might house the exact same
Physical.
objects, right? Books. But the psychological weight of those two environments could not be more different.
Right. Think about the pressure of a library.
Exactly. Think about what a library demands of you. It represents borrowed knowledge, which inherently comes with conditions.
Yes,
Strict rules governing your behavior. You have to maintain silence, you can't eat or drink, and perhaps most stressfully, you operate under a strict deadline. You must return the material by a certain date or face a penalty.
Shh. Keep your voice down, right?
Yeah. There is this underlying institutional pressure built into the very concept of a library.
But a bookstore, conversely, represents abundance and autonomy. It represents choice and the permanent acquisition of new ideas.
Yeah.
In a bookstore, the rules of a library are suspended. You can browse at your own pace, you can engage in conversation with others, you can linger without the looming threat of a due date.
You can grab a coffee.
Exactly. By selecting a bookstore as the primary setting, the subconscious is actively stripping away the psychological architecture of deadlines and institutional judgment. The brain is establishing a baseline rule for this specific sleep cycle, like, take your time, there is no impending test. You have the freedom to explore and acquire what you need.
And then that structural safety is reinforced by the population of the bookstore. The author notes that the space is filled with a mix of their middle school and high school classmates, and everyone is just coexisting harmoniously.
Which is wild because mixing those two distinct eras of life is a really fascinating mechanism.
Yeah. Why do you think it did that?
Well, in waking reality, the transition from middle school to high school is often defined by immense developmental friction, shifting social hierarchies, profound insecurity.
Oh man, middle school is the worst.
Right. But the dream strips away that historical friction. The brain takes phases that are deeply encoded in the author's long-term memory phases associated with foundational social development, and it uses them to engineer a secure container for the emotional processing to come.
Right.
It is leveraging nostalgia, but sanitizing it of its original stress.
See, I am going to push back a little on the idea that this is a perfectly engineered safe space from the jump.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because when I read that the dream was populated by high school classmates, my immediate thought was that the brain was actually setting up a third nightmare.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right. For most people, seeing high school classmates in a dream is the ultimate anxiety trigger.
Oh, for sure.
It usually precedes the realization that you don't know your locker combination, or you missed an entire semester of math, or, you're walking the halls without your clothes.
The classic naked dream. Right.
Exactly. So I suspect the brain didn't initially intend to build a safe space. I think it started loading the classic high school anxiety template, but because it had already exhausted the author's supply of stress hormones in the first two nightmares, the system essentially failed to render the panic.
Like it ran out of juice.
Yeah. The brain had to pivot mid-dream and turn a potential anxiety trap into a peaceful reunion because it just lacked the biochemical fuel to make it scary.
Okay, I hear you. But you're interpreting the brain's action as a failure of resources, right? Like a passive system simply running out of steam.
Well, yeah.
But consider an alternative framework. What if the brain isn't passively running out of neurochemicals? What if it is actively demonstrating sophisticated pattern interruption?
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the previous two dreams relied on standard threat simulation models, and they resulted in premature awakenings. The brain recognizes that the threat simulation approach is failing to achieve memory consolidation, so it deliberately loads the high school template, a known anxiety vector, and actively overwrites the expected emotional payload.
Oh, wow.
Right. By taking a classic stress trigger and forcing a harmonious, peaceful outcome, the brain provides a much deeper level of emotional regulation. It's proving to the dreamer that a historically stressful scenario can be navigated safely.
Oh, that's brilliant. It's actively rewriting the code of the anxiety trigger itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that reframing makes the layout of the story even more interesting then, because the author decides to wander beyond the book section, They travel up to the second floor, and the scene abruptly shifts to a furniture and home appliance section.
Yeah.
And the journal notes that the author felt very little interest in this area and just kept moving. They eventually reach the fourth floor, which is entirely dedicated to children's toys. And again, they find nothing that draws their attention and actively decide to return to the first floor with the books.
The rendering of those specific distinct floors is so symbolic of the brain presenting the dreamer with different psychological pathways for the night's processing.
Like options.
Exactly. The second floor furniture and appliances is deeply tied to the domestic sphere. It symbolizes adulthood, routine maintenance, the unending cycle of chores, and just the mental load of keeping a household functioning.
Which is stressful.
Very. And then the fourth floor, filled with children's toys, represents the opposite end of the spectrum. It symbolizes pure aggression, an escape into childhood escapism, and a total abdication of adult responsibility.
So it's essentially a psychological multiple choice test.
Yes.
The brain offers the dreamer 3 options for how to spend this crucial REM cycle. Option A is the stress of adult domestic maintenance. Option B is total regression and childish escapism. And option C is the bookstore intellectual narrative, learning, and social connection.
Right.
The dreamer's subconscious actively evaluates and rejects both the crushing weight of adulthood and the denial of regression. The healing needs to happen in that middle ground of narrative and connection.
And by returning to the first floor, the dreamer commits to the therapeutic work. And once that safe, carefully curated learning environment is fully locked in, the brain transitions from being an architect to acting as a therapist.
Which leads to what I consider, frankly, the most brilliantly absurd part of the entire source document.
Oh, the fake science.
Yes, the brain starts conducting actual emotional repair, but it masks this deep psychological work behind a completely invented pseudoscientific conversation. Let's look at the NFT neural network interaction.
It's so good.
So the author is back on the book floor walking alongside a boy from their middle school days. In waking life, the author remembers this specific boy as being somewhat prone to stage fright or nervousness. But the dream updates his status. He's no longer a nervous kid. He's an adult, and specifically, he's a father.
And the dream logic elevates the character to match the author's current adult reality, right? Embedding him with contemporary adult pressures and responsibilities, this establishes him as a peer, not just a memory.
Right. And the boy gives a wry, self-aware smile and makes a deeply personal confession. He states that his primary goal for the year is to cure his short temper and his tendency to get easily irritated.
Which is a very adult problem to have.
Exactly. But his proposed method for achieving this emotional regulation is studying a field that the dream completely fabricates out of thin air, the NFT neural network.
I love this part so much.
It's amazing. The author explicitly notes in the journal that the dream established this as a highly legitimate academic discipline dedicated to rewiring the brain's thought circuits.
The sheer predictive creativity of the sleeping mind is on full display here. The brain functions as an advanced language model, constantly trying to generate plausible narratives out of fragmented data.
Right.
So it takes NFT, a term heavily associated with modern digital complexity, ownership, and perhaps just the confusion of the contemporary tech landscape, and fuses it with neural network, a term grounded in biology, artificial intelligence, and structural processing.
It creates a phantom psychological cure that sounds just plausible enough to bypass the sleeping mind's bullshit detector.
Yes.
It sounds like a keynote presentation at a tech conference from 5 years in the future. It's the brain writing a custom software patch using the vocabulary of modern anxiety. But the humor of the fake science is really just a delivery mechanism for incredible empathy.
Oh, deeply empathetic.
Because the author responds to the friend's confession about his temper by saying, I studied that method in my 20s and corrected myself to some extent. And then the author delivers this beautifully grounded piece of advice. They say, it doesn't change things dramatically, but it doesn't hurt to do it.
And the true therapeutic detox occurs within the phrasing of that specific advice. To understand the mechanism of subconscious self-correction here, we have to look at the concept of psychological projection.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, in the landscape of a dream, every character, every interaction is ultimately a projection of the dreamer's own internal state.
Right, because there's nobody else in there.
Exactly. The author remembers this boy as having stage fright, a fundamental form of anxiety. Now, the boy is an adult struggling with irritability and a short temper.
And irritability is rarely a primary emotion. It is almost always the armor that exhaustion, anxiety, or overwhelm wears.
Spot on.
Given the context of the author's terrible sleep, repeated awakenings, back-to-back nightmares, The author is undeniably exhausted
Mhm.
and likely feeling intensely irritable in waking reality.
Yes. So projecting that exact irritability onto a childhood friend allows the author's subconscious to bypass its own defensive barriers.
Oh, I see.
If the author dreamed of themselves struggling with a short temper and acting out, it would likely trigger feelings of guilt, shame, or inadequacy.
Yeah, you'd wake up feeling bad about yourself.
Exactly. Those negative emotions would disrupt the safe space and likely spiral the dream back into nightmare territory. By displacing the flaw onto the friend, the author adopts the role of the wise, compassionate counselor.
It is a profound act of self-parenting disguised as catching up with an old buddy.
It really is.
The author doesn't offer a toxic positivity platitude. They don't claim the NFT neural network is a magic bullet that obliterates anger forever. They offer themselves realistic grace. It helps a bit. It doesn't hurt.
Lowering the stakes.
Right. They are lowering the stakes of self-improvement and providing deep emotional validation. I mean, think about your own dreams for a moment. Have you ever woken up from a deep sleep with a perfectly logical, completely foolproof solution to a problem you've been grappling with?
Oh, all the time.
Right. In the dream, it made absolute crystalline sense. Then you wake up, the fog clears, and you realize the solution was complete nonsense. Like realizing you can pay off your mortgage by teaching a golden retriever how to play the saxophone.
But the logical absurdity of the solution is actually irrelevant to the biological outcome.
Right.
The conscious, waking brain rejects the NFT neural network as gibberish. However, the emotional center of the brain, the amygdala, the limbic system, does not process vocabulary. It processes feeling states.
Okay, that makes sense.
It registers the feeling of being heard, the feeling of validation, and the feeling of a problem being actively managed. The waste emotion of anxiety or frustration associated with the poor sleep was successfully metabolized and fleshed out through this bizarre dialogue. The defragmentation of that specific emotional sector is basically complete.
But the brain's operating system doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't.
We've seen it act as an architect to build a safe space, and we've seen it act as a therapist to facilitate self-correction. To fully optimize the system and clear out the remaining emotional waste, the brain determines it also needs to act as a physical comedian.
Yes, the comedy section. The journal entry transitions into a series of humorous vignettes that initially appear disconnected from the main narrative of emotional repair, but they serve a vital regulatory function.
The comedy of the subconscious. The author describes a scene that plays out like a hidden camera prank.
Or an office sitcom.
Yeah, exactly. The author observes a man named Shinagawa-san from Shinagawa Shoji walking down a narrow aisle of the bookstore. And the author, hiding in the adjacent aisle, slides a thank you note under the gap beneath the shelf to surprise him. The journal notes this was executed as a good-natured prank.
Right.
Later in the dream, the punchline arrives. The author sees Shinagawa-san again. And the author specifically notes that Shinagawa-san doesn't feel like a personal friend or a teacher, but rather carries the aura of someone on a break from shooting a television show.
So specific.
It is. Shinagawa-san is enthusiastically walking around, bragging to random passersby, joyfully announcing, "I got a letter saying thank you from under the shelf." The author watches this unfold, secretly chuckling to themselves, reveling in the fact that they're the anonymous source of this joy.
Look at the sophisticated layering of positive emotion the brain is generating here.
Yeah, what is it doing?
The system is actively manufacturing an act of hidden benevolence. The author is deriving pure, unadulterated joy from dispensing anonymous gratitude and observing the positive ripple effect it has on a somewhat random, detached character. It's an exercise in generating positive affect without any expectation of direct reward.
It operates like a subconscious palate cleanser.
Exactly.
If the NFT conversation was the heavy, deep scan defragmentation of core emotional files, this prank is the brain clearing the temporary cache of minor irritations. It keeps the mood light. But the next comedic vignette is significantly more aggressive, and it directly addresses the lingering physical effects of the nightmares.
The encounter with the 2-meter-tall woman.
Yes, the author is navigating the bookstore and observes an older, white-haired foreign man wearing glasses. Suddenly, a massive woman, described as being over 2 meters tall, comes violently barreling around the corner at an incredible speed. Completely out of nowhere. She completely overtakes the older man, resulting in a physical collision. The man is jolted, has to push his glasses back up his nose, and rubs his elbow. The author witnesses this chaotic collision, simply thinks, wow, there's some really big people out there, and casually turns the next corner.
See, the author explicitly frames this giant woman at the very end of their journal entry, noting that she was the only element in the entire dream that felt a little scary.
Right.
This is a crucial data point for understanding subconscious threat neutralization.
If the fear is a corrupted file, the brain doesn't just delete it, it quarantines it in a folder marked slapstick.
Exactly. We have to remember the physiological reality of the dreamer here. They're sleeping on the heels of two nightmares. There is undoubtedly residual cortisol and adrenaline still circulating in their bloodstream.
The physical hangover of fear.
Yes. The heart might still be beating slightly faster than normal. The brain is receiving signals from the body that fear is present. It cannot simply ignore those physiological signals, right? It has to invent a narrative justification for them within the dream.
Okay, so the brain personifies that lingering biochemical fear into the figure of the giant, intimidating woman.
All right. However, to prevent a relapse into a nightmare state, the brain must aggressively manage her trajectory. If the giant woman were to chase the dreamer or threaten the dreamer directly, the threat simulation loop would reactivate and the dreamer would wake up in a panic.
Yeah, it would be nightmare number 3.
Instead, the brain directs the manifestation of fear to aggressively bypass the dreamer and collide with a random background extra.
The threat is neutralized through the physical comedy. It plays out like a Buster Keaton sequence. The brain takes the very real biological presence of fear and downgrades its threat level, giving it an outlet that results in a minor comical inconvenience for someone else rather than an existential crisis for the dreamer. The brain literally forces this system to lash off the remaining anxiety.
It is a masterpiece of emotional regulation. The brain acknowledges the fear, gives it a physical form, and then systematically strips it of its power through absurdity.
But this masterful regulation is immediately put to the test. Because just as the system seems fully stabilized, the dream introduces a classic, high-stakes stress trigger.
Yeah, the stolen backpack.
We move to the incident of the stolen backpack. And anyone who travels or anyone who carries the weight of daily responsibilities intimately knows the anxiety of a lost bag.
Oh, it's the worst feeling.
So the author is back on the first floor. The older foreign man from the collision is now obsessively reading books about the NFT brain structure, which is a brilliant callback by the brain's internal writer's room.
I love that detail.
Right. The author is doing what one naturally does in a bookstore of abundance gathering. They are hoarding books on a table, and they pack a backpack absolutely full of them.
And the symbolism of gathering these books is multi-layered. They represent the acquired knowledge of the dream, but they also symbolize the heavy mental load, the accumulation of the emotional waste that the author hypothesized about processing at the beginning of the journal.
The mental baggage. So the author packs this incredibly heavy bag and makes a critical decision. They leave it unattended.
Which is never a good idea.
Right. But their internal logic dictates that they are surrounded by friends, the girls from the sofa are nearby, the environment has been established as safe so the bag will be fine. They wander off to the 4th floor again, but upon their return to the 1st floor, the backpack is gone.
Oh, no.
And furthermore, the girls who are sitting on the sofa, the anchors of safety in that area, are also missing.
In the standard architecture of a stress dream, this is the definitive pivot point. This is where the defragmentation program typically encounters a fatal error and crashes.
Usually, a lost bag in a dream is the blue screen of death. The system crashes into outright panic. When I was reading the source for the first time, I fully expected the narrative to take a sharp turn right back into a nightmare.
Yeah, me too.
You lose a bag filled with things you've painstakingly gathered, and the usual dream logic dictates that your heart starts pounding. You try to run, but your legs feel like molasses. You try to scream, but no sound comes out, and the environment turns hostile.
Right, the walls start closing in.
So how does the author's brain process this massive conflict without crashing the system?
It executes a flawless subversion of expectations. It resolves the stress trigger through a combination of communal support and just surreal absurdity. The missing bag was not stolen, nor was it lost.
Wait, really? So what happened?
The anxious boy, the father from the NFT conversation, suddenly reappears. He is blushing, and he brings the backpack directly back to the author. He apologizes profusely for the delay, noting how incredibly heavy the bag is. He has voluntarily taken on the burden of carrying it.
Oh, wow. And the missing girls haven't abandoned the author at all either. They come walking over, laughing joyously, and having a fantastic time.
Doing what?
The reason they are laughing is completely unhinged, but brilliant. They are using this scary 2-meter-tall woman as a literal training weight.
Oh my gosh.
They are giving each other piggyback rides while simultaneously carrying this giant woman, playfully complaining to one another about how heavy she is.
Look at the redirection of the load-bearing architecture in this scene. The brain actively diffuses the high-stress scenario by distributing the psychological weight across the community.
Yeah.
Instead of theft and betrayal narratives that would reinforce the isolation and anxieties of the waking world, the brain's explanation is that your community has your back, even if they're demonstrating it in the most absurd way possible.
The heavy burden is no longer the author's sole responsibility. The books are heavy. The giant woman is heavy. This combined weight represents the mental load and the residual fear that the author carried into sleep, but the author is relieved of the pressure.
Right, it's shared.
The anxious friend literally shoulders the burden of the accumulated knowledge and stress. The girls literally shoulder the weight of the residual fear. The author's reaction in the text is one of profound, overwhelming gratitude. They thank the friend, the girls jokingly demand to be thanked as well, and the author sincerely expresses gratitude to everyone.
And the emotional loop of the defragmentation program is closed right there.
Wow.
The feeling of being unsupported, the fear of loss, the burden of the mental load, all of it has been processed, distributed, and neutralized. The emotional detox is complete.
You can feel the relief radiating off the page in the journal. With the emotional baggage returned and the anxiety completely diffused, the dream shifts into its final, most poignant phase. The parting of ways.
The ending.
This is where the landscape of the dream expands dramatically, signaling a shift in consciousness. Up until now, the entirety of the psychological work has been contained inside this cozy, warmly lit, massive bookstore. But now, an old friend, someone the author notes he used to play with for a long time, steps forward from the group. The friend announces that they must leave, stating specifically that the way back requires crossing the border.
The introduction of a border in dream architecture is a deeply significant symbol. A border represents a threshold, a definitive transition between two entirely different states of being.
And the visual contrast the author describes when they look outside the bookstore is stunning and stark. They don't see a normal city street or a parking lot. Outside the facility, the landscape is a vast, sprawling, barren wasteland.
A wasteland.
Yeah. And in the far distance, across this wasteland, there's a massive, imposing mountain range. The author notes a trick of perspective. The mountains are so unimaginably huge that they actually appear small because they're so impossibly far away.
The cinematic contrast really highlights the transition here. You have the warm, secure, socially harmonious interior of the bookstore representing the completed work of the subconscious. Outside, you have the vast, intimidating, harsh reality of the wasteland and the mountains.
The way I interpret this architectural shift is that we are witnessing the literal moment of the author waking up. The border is the veil between the sleep state and waking consciousness.
Oh, interesting.
The friend who announces he must cross the border, who smiles bravely and says goodbye as he heads out into the harsh wasteland toward those impossible mountains. That friend symbolizes the conscious mind.
Right.
The conscious mind is preparing to leave the sanctuary of the healed subconscious and return to the difficult, imposing reality of the waking world. Those mountains represent the morning commute, the unread emails, the stressors of the day, and the physical reality of having slept poorly.
Yes. The conscious mind must cross the border and navigate the wasteland, but crucially, the dreamer's core emotional self remains secure.
Right.
The author watches the friend depart, feeling a sense of empathetic worry for them, acknowledging that he has to cross that harsh mountain, but the author remains safely behind, enveloped by the warm group of friends they were scheduled to travel home with.
The emotional state the author describes upon waking is so specific and beautifully complex. They don't describe waking up with, like, unbridled, simplistic joy. They describe a rich, emotional cocktail. They feel nostalgia, a profound sense of beauty, a touch of loneliness watching the friend leave, but ultimately a deep, soft fulfillment.
That complex emotional integration is the ultimate hallmark of successful psychological processing. A system crash leaves you feeling frantic. A successful defragmentation leaves you feeling integrated.
Yeah.
The brain hasn't just magically erased the negative emotions of the night. It has processed them, contextualized them, and integrated them into a state of fulfillment. The author woke up knowing with absolute certainty that their brain had successfully cleaned out the psychological waste.
It is an incredible journey to track. Just to recap the sheer scale of what this single sleep cycle accomplished, we started with a conscious theory from someone suffering from terrible fragmented sleep, wondering if the brain can still detox under such hostile
It
conditions.
did.
Their own brain answered them by constructing a highly specific therapeutic environment, actively overriding an anxiety trigger, inventing fake neuroscience to process irritability, writing physical slapstick comedy to quarantine fear, subverting a panic trigger through absurd communal support, and finally, staging a beautifully bittersweet, cinematic goodbye at the very border of consciousness.
The journal entry reinforces a profound reality about human biology and psychology. Even when our physical sleep is fragmented, even when we are battered by nightmares, the brain works relentlessly behind the scenes to fight for our equilibrium.
It really does.
It acts simultaneously as an architect, software developer, a therapist, and a comedian, deploying all of these roles to regulate our emotional well-being and clear the cache of our daily lives.
It's so easy to get frustrated when we sleep poorly, to lie in the dark and feel like our bodies are betraying us. But this deep dive proves that the brain never stops trying to write the code that will save us from our own stress. Which brings me to a final thought I want you to take with you. We've spent this entire time marveling at the incredible, surreal lengths the sleeping brain goes to in order to heal us. Inventing fake science, deploying giant women as physical comedy, turning anxiety into piggyback rides.
Yeah.
It uses absurdity, deep empathy, and connection to resolve our deepest fears. So consider this. If our sleeping minds are this brilliantly creative at resolving our deepest anxieties through absurdity and connection, why do we insist on trying to solve all our waking problems with pure, rigid logic? Maybe the next time you are overwhelmed by the waking world, the solution isn't to think harder, but to let the mind wander a little closer to the absurd.
A powerful reminder to trust the unseen work of the mind.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the subconscious. We will see you next time.